Hello, this is Raphael. You're joining me to the search for the center of the world. The best way to do it is actually by sitting here. I'm right now on the rooftops of the houses of the old city of Jerusalem, just in between the main holy places, the Temple Mount, or how it's called in Arabic, the Al-Aqsa complex, and the Holy Sepulchre just behind my back. So this city, and I'm not an archaeologist, but I'm trained as a historian and as a philologist. But I can say that in philology, you have this term called palimpsest. Palimpsest is a manuscript, usually parchment, but it can be anything. And the text was erased and a new text was written upon it. So Jerusalem in a way is also a palimpsest. You have many texts. If you treat the buildings, the architecture as a text, as a story, you can see that one person is trying to tell the story on the ruins of someone else's story. That's what happens when you have conflicts, wars. But in palimpsest, the interesting thing is that although you have a completely different text, for example, some monk decides to write the life of Saint Anthony on the text of some commentary on Aristotle's works, for example. But you can still see, if you read the life of the saint on the palimpsest, you can see the older text. There are new technological ways of revealing also the older text. So, for example, the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's also called in Arabic, in old Arabic manuscripts, Bayt al-Muqaddas. Bayt al-Muqaddas is the same in Hebrew what you call Beit HaMikdash. Of course, this will sound absolutely controversial to many people, but that's history, where you can see that the older story remains even when the story is a bit different. So you have different narratives. And the same can be said also about the Holy Sepulchre, because the Holy Sepulchre is actually located on the old Roman city center, the Forum. And you even had there the Temple of Venus. So let's join me to see how in fact all these various stories interact. How, although you have one place telling a particular story, you can still see the story told by other people. I find this very interesting. The city of Jerusalem has many stories to tell. The story was told many times by many different people who conquered the city, built their own structures. The city was then rebuilt, etc., etc. We will start, however, from the Romans. Although the Romans were not the first to tell the story of the city or to build it, but they have left for the last 2,000 years a strong impact on the way the city still looks. So if we're into the center, let's go to the heart of the city. And the heart of the city, of the Roman city, is in fact the Cardo. Cardo comes from the Greek word cardia, heart. So the city center had to be a very strict line, very symmetric, which starts in the north and ends in the south. And this line still divides the city to east and western parts. This is the Cardo Maximus. It starts at the northern gate, which corresponds to the Damascus gate, Bab al-Amud in Arabic, and it continues from north to south, dividing the city again into the western and eastern parts. So there still are two streets which start from Damascus Gate. So if you stand Damascus Gate, you have the option of going through Khan al-Zayt Street. It's a market, But this market corresponds with the Cardo Maximus. But then you have the other Cardo, the Cardo Valentius, and it corresponds with the street called Al-Wad. This street leads you all the way to the Western Wall and to the Temple Mount. So as you see, you had this very neat system of line of pillars, and you had these roofed space with shops all around. And there was another street called the Decamenos. That was the street which led you from west to east, and the place where they interacted with the Cardo was actually, in fact, the Forum. And this Forum was afterwards transferred during Constantine the Great into the Basilica of the Anastasis. That means the Holy Sepulchre, the place where Christ was crucified, his holy tomb, and also the place where, according to tradition, the cross was found, the true cross. As you see, the Temple Mount is absent from the Madaba map. Now, traditional maps, unlike modern maps, although one might even say that modern maps are the same, they really depend on the inner map, on the inner image of the city the creator has, the person who creates the map. One can say that each religion imagines the city in another completely other way. It's one thing what the Muslim sees, what the Jew sees, or what the Christian, Catholic, or Orthodox see. They see a completely different map. So for each one of the faiths, you have a contested place, which is the center. And even when there is agreement on where the center is, each religion, each community of faith sees it in a completely different way. It's one thing how an Orthodox Jew looks at the Temple Mount, and it's completely different view that a devout Muslim has. Although the root of the tradition is actually the same. It's in the ancient Jerusalem temple tradition. So you have these traditions of the center, of the navel of the world, the circle, the place where one stands and his dialogue with God, with the divine, is open. In other words, it's like the place where Jacob dreamt of the ladder which leads from earth to heaven. This ladder could be any place, but according to particular traditions, it is in some particular spot. So although we have here the view of a typical Middle Eastern market, it corresponds with the Cardo, in fact. This is called the meat sellers market. And this is where the Roman Forum stood. This point had no particular significance in the first century. That means during the period when Christ was crucified. It was actually the exit from the city. So you had here a city wall, which can still be seen if we enter this structure, which is called the Russian excavations at the Alexander Nevsky Church. Just underground, we can see the remainings of the city wall and a triumphal arch, which was used in the 2nd century to enter the Forum, but in the 1st century, that was in fact the gate which led to Golgotha, because Golgotha and the Holy Sepulchre, they were outside these city walls we see right now. So according to Russian tradition from the late 19th century, Christ actually followed this way on his way to Calvary, on his way to be crucified. Nowadays, the Church of Alexander Nevsky and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre are separate buildings, completely separate. However, what we see over here is the remainings of one of the pillars that were from the 4th century. So you had a big courtyard which led you all the way to the martyrium. That was a big church which was around Golgotha, and there was another church, a domed church, on top of the Holy Sepulchre itself. This arch is the remainings also of the church built by Constantine, with material used from the pagan temple dedicated to Venus. During the rule of Constantine the Great, two very important events, which are interconnected, happened. Constantine transposed the capital from Rome to Byzantium, and also he transformed Aelia Capitolina, Jerusalem. Transformed it from a typical Roman Eastern Greek-speaking province into the main inspiration for the whole empire, where the most important imperial churches were built. All the other churches of the empire, in a way, were like a copy of the main church in Jerusalem, the Basilica of the Resurrection, the Anastasis. In our future videos, we will talk about the holy centers of Jerusalem, how the city changed from a Jewish city into a Greek polis, into a Roman city, then to a Christian Roman city, and into an Arab Medina. And each one of them had its own holy spot.